Hello there and welcome. It's me, Martin Cross, and I'm with John Wojtkiewicz today on Crossy's Corner. Delighted to welcome you, John.
Just super thrilled to be here, Martin. Thank you so much for inviting me and really, really excited to talk about this topic. I'm just a lot of gratitude that it's gotten so much attention.
Yeah, you've had a lot of traction, haven't you, when that article came out on LinkedIn, Rowing a $0 billion industry. It's a great title for a post.
Yeah, I mean, it's a point that I think everybody in our community, both domestically here in the United States and internationally, we've all been asking the question, this is such an amazing sport, amazing recreational activity that we do. Why is it so hard to earn a living wage doing it, right? And it really got me thinking on that. Well, I mean, I've been thinking about it for years as a professional coach, and if I could tell a story real quick, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, that's right.
So. About a year and a half ago, we had a big scandal here in the States around there's a big controversy around some very wealthy families paying a college counselor to get their kids into high-level universities. And the way they were doing that was creating fake athletic profiles and you getting them in as athletic athletes, or excuse me, as student athletes, recruited student athletes. And one of the more higher profile cases was an actress here in Los Angeles and her daughter. They were offering her as a coxswain. Of course, she had nothing to do with rowing. She had but they created this whole profile, and it was a big scandal. And I think the actress paid something like $500,000 to do this.
What?
Yeah, it was a really, really big deal.
Insane.
Yeah. And so, I was lamenting to my wife one day, I said, God, there's no money in rowing. And she said, well, obviously that's not true. Somebody once paid $500,000 just to pretend their kid rows. And that really sent me on the direction of like, well, there's money out there, right? We're just not asking for it. We're not hitting, the right points to engage that investment into the community. And so then I really started to think, okay, so how do we, if the money's out there, if people can drop $500,000 just to pretend their kid rows, what would they be willing to pay if their kid was actually rowing? And that sort of got the genesis of the article and where it's really made me think about laying it out.
Yeah, we should sort of say people will obviously know from the way you talk, John, that you have spent a lifetime in the sport, but maybe just a brief resume.
Yeah, sure. So I've been coaching for working in the rowing community one way or another, coaching and leading teams and organizations for over 25 years. I started in New England, Boston. Out of Boston University. I was a student athlete there. Actually started sculling before that at a little club in Providence, Rhode Island called Narragansett Boat Club. Fantastic club, great culture there. Graduated immediately, got into coaching. Coached at a small university in Worcester called Clark University, from just went on from there. Went back to Boston University to coach for a number of years. My wife's work led us out to Los Angeles, coached junior athletes in Los Angeles, went back to Boston, coached again for another couple of years with Boston University, University of Rhode Island, back to the West Coast, and coached at head coach at a Division I school in the Bay Area called Santa Clara. And then there's a few coaching gigs, smaller ones here and there, but leading us back to Los Angeles, and I'm the boys varsity coach at the University of California, Los Angeles junior rowing team.
Yeah, and I know you're currently on furlough there, but you've got this consultancy that you've kind of this growing consultancy, which kind of taps you into a lot of different sort of views and opinions and people.
Yeah. So I started, I mean, I was doing this ad hoc for a number of years, just here and there, helping people out with different projects within their rowing clubs. I was doing some coach recruiting, finding coaches for organizations and filling open headcount. And again, my wife and her infinite genius said, why don't you make this into a company? And I thought, well, that's great. And so, I think there's a lot of coaches out there that are leveraging their experience and their skill set into online coaching. And I looked at that and I thought, well, that's a great model. But I also realized that no one is really working directly with the organizations. And there's, again, we work in an outstanding community full of some really, really brilliant people, well-educated, very, very strategic, very thoughtful people. But not everybody knows everything all the time. And I frequently come across clubs that are challenged in one way or another, strategically and tactically. How do we plan 5, 10, 15, 20 years budgetarily? One project I recently did was mapping out the depreciation schedule for equipment. Like, okay, what should our turnover schedule be?
Yeah.
It's been it's a really fun way to spend some time working with all these different rowing clubs and seeing their challenges, but also seeing how well they work, and it's been a great cauldron for good ideas.
Wow.
Right. And so I feel like I'm at the nexus of a lot of really, really terrific things, and also seeing where the challenges are.
Yeah. Some people are going to go ask questions. I mean, sometimes it's always a bit of a juggle. Does the question, ask a question if someone, Phil Lubicic, is listening to this. So before we actually get into your article, he's asked this question. I don't know if you've thought about it or not.
I haven't. I mean, we do have that track record. It may be over 100 years old at this point, but the last time we went down that route, it kind of wrecked the professional level of rowing, right? If people that are uninformed or unaware, back in the day, rowing used to be a huge sport, and then there was so much betting and gambling around it that it kind of fell apart. There was so much corruption around it. I'm going to waffle a little bit on that answer. I haven't really thought about it. I think, obviously there's sports betting that occurs in a lot of other sports to a successful degree. Without getting too political, I think when you invite things like that, you invite more government intervention and regulation. And I think that that's not always the best thing. You certainly don't want to bring more scrutiny into what you're doing. So I don't know. I think maybe there's better ways to earn money in rowing than simply turning from the gambling.
Well, I mean, let's talk about this article, which has got all this traction that you've written. And I think in part it was because there were some controversial elements to it, in as much as you were looking at our sport, which is an amateur sport, and you were saying that it's the amateurism that keeps our sport, so poor.
Yeah. I think I sort of intentionally put that in there to draw attention to it. I think I think one of the things that we've held up as the standard within our community is this idea that we're amateurs, and I think that sort of dovetails neatly with the ideal of Olympic amateurs, right? Now we all know that that's the idea of the Olympic amateur is pretty far gone at this point, except for rowing. It wasn't meant. It was meant to be critical to get the reader's attention. I don't think we necessarily need to sacrifice all of our traditions, But I think really the point of it was, hey, we can be so intractably tied to our traditions, which are like an amazing, wonderful thing. But it's those traditions that keep people out. Because when you bring somebody new into an activity and then you sort of pile on these things, well, you do it this way and that way, and you can't do it this, this way. I think those things can become very, very burdensome to somebody that's relatively new to the sport. One club I used to coach at, this is many, many years ago, but in order to qualify to take out a club single, you had to do a standing shove from the dock. And yeah, and that's certainly possible to do in a single, but it's a very refined skill. So as an instructor, following the rules, I mean, it's extraordinarily difficult to teach a septuagenarian to do a standing shove in a single. It can be done, but somebody that's a novice, I mean, you can obviously imagine some of the challenges around that. But that's the idea, is that, we have so many of these amateur traditions that it sort of precludes somebody early on getting into the sport with an active interest and not necessarily being frustrated by all these rules. And I think the second part of that, of course, is we have to be able to let go of the amateurism so that it's okay for someone to start monetizing what we're doing within the community. I think there's tolerance for coaches that want to coach on the side, but I think as soon as somebody says, what if we were to, change things a little bit, really think about how to monetize this, and dare I say, what if we were to raise dues? What if we were to charge more to be part of the club? And that's where things get really, really controversial, and people, they start to push back and say, well, we don't, why do we need to raise dues? Everything's fine. Well, because you want professional coaches, you want quality equipment, you want your facility to be maintained. And I think, I think amateurism sort of implies that the boat bay has to have rodent droppings all over it. There have to be old T-shirts, and the more we can move away from that, the better.
Yeah. Steve O'Connor, welcome, Steve. Thanks for listening. He's asked a couple of questions. There are two here from Steve. He's just put one up now. Mm-hmm. But there's that question about the clubs, and this question, which I guess would be dear to his heart. Do you want to deal with maybe both of those? So welcome everyone that's tuned in and listening, and thanks for your questions. We'll try and get through as many of them as we can. But how about that, John?
Okay, so are there good examples of clubs in the U.S. that are financially secure? Yeah, absolutely. I can highlight one club in Connecticut, a state in the United States. Saugatuck Rowing Club is a for-profit rowing club that is doing, it's a private club, so I don't know what the financials are, but they've been running that club for, I imagine over 10 years now, 10, 15 years. And not only that, the owner of that club has created a model where they've actually created a Row America brand, where they started two other clubs on top of that, also for profit. And they're doing very well. Saugatuck, on the youth side, their women have won, I think it's something like 4 or 5 national championships in a row at the club level. And they're sending their athletes to top tier American universities to row and compete. But yeah, when you look at the nonprofit area, then yeah, there's also some very, very wealthy clubs that are very, very successful. Particularly on the West Coast, you have clubs like Marin, Oakland Strokes. Our own club at UCLA is financially solvent. We function in the black every year. In fact, the recreation department at UCLA that sponsors us, they're very happy every year with the slight black ink, the slight amount of black ink that we have. So I think if you look at the large clubs across the United States, there's a very, very good model for growth and financial support. And I want to make it clear that these clubs have very strong fundraising arms, but they operate in the black because they're charging an appropriate amount to make sure that they're meeting their budget. And that's really the key thing. I think a lot of clubs, they still are undercharging.
Yeah. There's a few questions here. Steve O'Connor says, in terms of clubs understanding, I think Philip Bachich has, in terms of blame, is this to do with the way clubs are run? Is this the fact they're run by amateurs rather than professionals? And Rory Cruikshank asked, do you think club annual fees are the key, or should prize money be more important? A lot of other.
Well, where do I start?
Yeah, how about this one then?
How well do you think clubs truly understand the cost of running a boat club? Well, I think it varies from club to club based on the conversations that I've had in the past. There are some clubs that get it, I guess. And I think, one club I can think of that I work with, they actually have a tiered system of dues. So if you're younger, just out of college, you pay less than somebody who's more senior and ostensibly has more income. I've also seen some clubs that haven't raised their dues in 20 years. And they have a facility that they're trying to maintain. They're trying to buy new equipment, and they don't understand why there's so much red ink in the budget. And I have to say, well, you're charging. I did a post about this yesterday, actually. Inflation is a thing, right? And so if you haven't raised your dues in 20 years, that may be well and good for the people that have been there for the last 20 years. But the roof is falling off, the plumbing doesn't work. You have to pay the electric bill. That's very, very challenging. So I do think that there are some clubs where the board of directors can be somewhat intractable. And for some reason, when the conversation about dues comes up, everybody gets really, really emotional, and I have to always wonder why it's, obviously, okay, no one wants to pay more money, right? But I'm going to call the bluff on that a little bit, because again, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've seen people leave rowing because of time commitment, because of family commitment, academic commitment. I've never seen anybody say, that is too much money, I quit. And maybe my experience is limited on this. I'll certainly be willing to hear alternate ideas, but and this is another point. When you look at other recreational clubs, golf clubs, football clubs, and you look at what they're charging for ostensibly an outstanding athletic recreational experience versus what rowing clubs are charging, we're not less valuable and experienced being out on the water than golf being out on the course. But why do we charge 10% less, or not 10%, 10% of what a country club charges?
Yeah, that
to me just boggles my mind. And it's not a less valuable experience. So in order to come back around to the original question, I think by and large, it's not that they don't understand the cost of running the club, but I think a lot of people have been getting a really, really sweet deal for 60, 70 years, and they don't want to change it. They don't want to change it.
So presumably hand in hand, is you talk about in part 2 of your article, you talk about the numbers of surfers that there are in the US. You talk about the number of people that swing a club.
Right.
compared to what is it, 93,000 rowers, and so part of a vision would be that 93,000 would be what? I mean, what's the capacity for rowing? Just say in the US.
Well, I mean, I think golf is a great example of what our potential could be. There, if you think about it, they're very, very similar experiences. They're outside. A lot of people view them as expensive hobbies, but yet, at least in the United States, access to golf is pretty broad. You have public courses that people can access and go and. I mean, I'm not a golfer, so I don't know what the greens fees are to go out and do 18 for a day. But people, I've known people from all income classes that golf, and so I think that, and then so in terms of the barriers to entry, that it is a highly complex skill set. Right. I have tried to learn how to swing a golf club. I'm not very good at it. And I imagine those first swings I took were similar to the first strokes that you see a novice take in that big area, right? Awkward and sort of unaware. So it's not any harder to learn how to row than say it is to learn how to golf. And you could talk about the cost of equipment, but I think that's another area that we could stand to look at. For just to sort of tangentially talk about equipment, that the cost of equipment doesn't need to be as high as it is. We have manufacturers using very, very expensive materials to make high performance racing shells, that we don't, somebody doesn't need to learn how to row in a brand new Empacher. And, and even the sort of lower tier, if you will, recreational shells can be seen as somewhat expensive, but that's because I think the volume of sales on those boats are so low. If you were to introduce more volume, I think manufacturers would be more inspired to get into this space. You can't go into a sporting goods store and purchase a rowing shell. You can't go buy a plastic kayak, but you can't get a rowing shell. Now, wouldn't that be neat if you could? It's sort of like if you wanted to go cycling, if you wanted to go just for a cruise down the beach on your bike, but your only option is a $10,000 touring bike, right? I mean, it's kind of absurd, right? And it's not the fault of the manufacturers. This is where the demand is right now. But I think if we were to bring more people into the sport, improve the experience, make it more accessible in terms of friendliness, then that might change. Go ahead.
So how do you start this process of bringing more people into the sport? What and what is chicken and egg with this? Is it you raise fees first and then you try and bring more people in, or how do you have a kind of a plan in your mind that would be a way of achieving, monetizing rowing, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step, and again, this may be the hardest pill for people to swallow, is we need to start charging more. I mean, that's the first thing, right? And that's going to be really, really challenging for some people. But again, I'll call the bluff a little bit and say, I've never had a conversation as a club leader, as a team leader. I've never had a conversation with anybody saying, I can't afford it anymore, I'm quitting. And then you look at what more people are paying for other sports. More people are paying more for other activities. So I'm part of my language, I'm going to call BS a little bit on the we can't afford the club dues. So that would be the first thing, is we need to raise the club dues. Okay. We need to put more money back into our individual clubs, right? So that we can improve the facility, improve the equipment, bring more learn to row equipment in instead of investing in, and I'm sorry, I don't know what the exchange rate is, but instead of investing in the $60,000, Empacher here in the United States, let's purchase more wherries. Let's purchase more learn to row, open water, learn to row, wide body rowing shells. And then you can improve the aesthetic of your club, right? How many clubs have a dedicated cleaning staff that they pay to come in and sweep the bays, not just once a week or once a month, but every day, that clean the bathrooms, right? I think all these things contribute to the experience of someone when they first step into the club. I will say I've lost students because they've one step into the club, they look around and they're like, no, I'm not, this is not what I expected. I heard a great podcast a number of years ago that was talking about the novice experience and compared it to if you were to go to a tennis lesson for your first time, your first tennis lesson, and you go to the tennis club, and the first thing that happens is they take you to the back of the club and this old court where it's cracked. There's weeds coming up out of the ground. The net is drooping, and they hand you a broken racket, and then the instructor learned to play tennis 6 months ago, and that's kind of the novice experience, the first time exposure for a lot of people, particularly in the United States, that they're given old equipment. They tie into this boat, which may be cracked and have old cruddy shoes. And I'm not saying that they need to have the top of the line stuff, but again, we need to change that experience. So the first thing certainly is I think we need to charge more for what we're doing.
Yeah, carry on. That was an interesting point that just came up from Lafrine there. But the first thing is charge more. Then
right.
What?
Well, and then I think we need to take a hard look at privatization. I say that in the article is starting to move these clubs away from the nonprofit. And I use nonprofit. That's sort of colloquially what we say in the United States. I don't know if there's a similar term in the UK, but
charitable status, I
guess. Charity, right? So we need to move these clubs over to a private model. A lot of time what comes up in the conversations is, well, we need more investment. We need more investment in the sport. Well, you can't have investment unless there's a payout, right? You can talk about the community benefit. You can talk about, teaching underserved communities or giving them access to the sport and to the outside and to the water. But frankly, there's a lot more charities that bring a lot more good that are can be more appealing. The cancer charities. There's a million things that fall ahead of rowing when people give money. So you want investment, you have to attach some kind of dividend to that investment. And so I think privatizing those clubs, and again, I wouldn't know what the legal process would be in the UK, but there is a path in the United States to do that. It's not easy, but I think if you highlight, and then here's the other point, these nonprofit clubs that are functioning as charities, okay, I think we could agree that a lot of the members of these clubs don't necessarily need to benefit from charity. When you look at some of the cars that are driving up and parking at these clubs, then you start to wonder, okay, is this really a charitable organization, or is this sort of I don't mean to be cynical about it, right? But you got to kind of say, like, okay, people give money, they support the club, and who's benefiting? So so moving from nonprofit to private.
So who's going to invest in rowing clubs? You're talking about entrepreneurs,
in
effect, giving the club a good deal of money in return. Or how's practically that going to work, John?
Well, I think you have to find those investors that are, and I don't think it requires a tremendous amount of investment. You have to have the business plan. You have to be able to present, like, this is a sustainable business. This is what the operational costs are. This is what we're going to charge. I don't think it requires that much investment. I don't think you need 30 million. I don't think you need 10 million. I think, even a small business loan of $100,000. And again, I'm sorry, I'm working in dollars. I don't know what the exchange rate is, but even a small business loan, I think, is enough to get a club to the point where it can purchase the equipment. And sorry, let me take a step back. The step is towards privatization. You create the business, right? Because you can't buy a nonprofit. Nobody owns a nonprofit. You create the business. The business purchases the assets of the nonprofit. Okay. The nonprofit still exists.
Yeah.
The nonprofit takes the liquidity from that purchase and puts it into either dispenses it to other charities or nonprofits, or ideally, here's this for an idea, takes the liquidity from the purchase of those assets and puts it into a charitable foundation or endowment that does in fact go directly into the underserved community.
Yeah, there's a point there. Adrian Cassidy, who is listening, he said his concern is, if you're concerned about diversity and underprivileged communities, which one of the weaker spots of rowing, how does that pricing model change the access to those communities to the sport?
Sure. I think, in our club currently, we have, we would be considered on the more expensive. I think we charge $3,000 a year, a little around $3,000 a year for athletes. Yeah. But that's all inclusive. So that's all travel, gear, everything, hotel, bus, some food. So it's a lot, but we also, it's going directly back to the athletes. But we also offer financial aid for people that qualify, that can't afford it. So I think, and in particular, if you start charging more, then your club has the bottom line budget to start bringing in people that maybe can't afford it, right? And then you have a financial aid process and so on and so forth. But right now, or maybe you could take that extra, some of that extra cash and put that into transportation to bring people that don't have access because of transportation to the club, right? That's something that's been an example that's been proven out here in the United States, where some clubs have actually, through grants, purchased passenger vans, and they've gone to the local inner city school, picked up the kids, and brought them to the club. So I don't, again, I'll push back on that a little bit, because I don't think increasing the dues is going to immediately cause everybody to quit or restrict access. I think it's exactly the opposite. I think the more money you bring into the club through the dues process, or through increasing dues, the more accessibility you're going to create, because all of a sudden you have, you have money that you can leverage towards allowing greater access. Right now, rowing clubs are extremely poor. I think everybody agrees about that, right? Like, and I'll say, like, okay, well, we've been doing it a certain way for the last 70, 80 years. And we don't have the diversity. We don't have the inclusion. So what have we got to lose?
Yeah. I guess the model that you think of in terms of the US is, there's a lot of, rich donors who have been to college and have made, quite a few bucks on Wall Street. I'm thinking of the way that the new rowing center in Brooklyn was funded.
Right,
on the Brooklyn River. And I'm also thinking of, the way that US rowing is funded as well, which is by kind of philanthropic donation, I think. So I'm wondering if the system in the US is people are so used to that kind of model, a sugar daddy maybe come in with a lot of money, that the desire to privatize just isn't there.
Yeah, I think certainly there's going to be some pushback there. I think, but I also think that maybe we could shine a light on some of these charities. And let me back up. Real charities like a program like Row New York or Community Rowing in Boston. We have a club, Row LA, and here in Los Angeles that specifically targets not the right word, cater to underserved communities, right? Those are outstanding organizations, and we need to support them and continue to help them grow as much as possible. What I'm shining a light on is those clubs that function as nonprofits, as charities, but are not serving underserved communities, right? Almost exclusively not serving those communities. And again, I don't want to make it sound like an accusation, but I think the step towards moving our sport forward, improving the experience, getting more people involved, is by bringing more money into it, growing these clubs into private organizations that are investment worthy, that generate income, that somebody, if they put down $500,000 or even $1 million, that they're going to see 10-15% optimally, or maybe it's even if it's just 5 or 10%, that's investment worthy for some people.
Do you think the right people are running clubs that actually there's the environment to make that happen?
Yes and no. I think there are some clubs that are ready to pick that up, but I do think there's probably some legacy players that are going to dig their heels in, because again, they're used to paying $200 a year for their access. They don't understand why, if it works for them, why it needs to change. I've spoken with clubs in the past that have flat out told me, we're not interested in growing. We're not interested in bringing in new members. We're not interested in teaching people how to row. We just want our little club, and maybe that's okay. But I think as someone, I consider myself to be a growth-minded individual. I'm always trying to move forward as a coach in our sport. I love our sport. I want to broaden its appeal. I think I'm pretty convinced that this is the way to go. Yeah.
There's this question here, which we talked about before we went on air, about in Boston, the CRI model, which I think, on terms of bums per seat, getting people through, they have a really effective model, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, they're an outstanding organization. I mean, they were, they've been around. I think they started in the mid '80s. So somebody do the math for me. What is that? 35 years. So it really, and they were growing consistently. I even rode out of there for a little bit with their Masters men. Great experience, great setup. And then, they were able to, through charitable gifts, build the Harry Potter boathouse, which is a fantastic facility. And then Bruce Smith came on board as a CEO, and he, over 10 years, he's now, if people aren't familiar, he's now the CEO of Hydro, the indoor rowing machine company. And he just did an amazing job there. And they really, really blew up. And in terms of access, absolutely, I would give them a very, very hard look as a model to follow in terms of access and providing for all communities. I mean, they have, they run a Paralympic training center out of there, so they have elite athletes rowing out of that facility. But they're also still running learn to row classes and again sessions for underserved communities. So yeah, absolutely, CRI is an outstanding example for that.
Phil Lubicic asked about other parts of rowing's ecosystem. So we focused on clubs. We haven't really talked so much about events and their capacity for income generation. A lot of events here would the money would be run by clubs and go back into the clubs.
Well, again, that I think that's a question of broadening the public appeal through the growth of the clubs, privatizing the clubs, spectator sports are most popular when the spectators know what's going on, right? So, you look at American football, for example. Why is American football so big in the United States? Well, as a high school sport, it's huge. Almost every single high school in the United States is offering some type of football program, right? So you have all these young men for the last 70, 80 years been coming through football. So they know what it is. They can watch the game. They understand what's happening. They empathize with the athletes. When you get a rowing competition, a lot of people don't know what's happening, right? They see the boats go by. What's happening? I don't know. I think things like the technology, the drone, the online streaming has gone a long way to help that along. But I still think there's a lack of understanding in the public of what they're looking at. So if you increase access, if you get more people doing it, as a natural byproduct of that, you're going to have more people interested in watching it happen at a very, very high level. And that's what we're talking about in terms of professional rowing, competitions, events, sponsorships. But I think the key thing is we need to improve access. We need to invest in these clubs as private organizations, broaden the public appeal, and then the rest will follow.
I know one of the things you've been critical of clubs for not doing has been engaging on social media, and particularly something like Facebook ads. Which, where did that stem from?
Well, it's again, my wife, the genius, right? So she's a professional marketer, and she works. She's works for a toy company. And so she's a VP of marketing at a toy company. So she's constantly thinking about how to get her message out there. And digital media, online, social networks is definitely the way to go. Old media, newspaper flyers and television, that is definitely down on the decline. And if you think about platforms like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, that's where people are flocking for their content now. So I think, for rowing clubs, I don't think there's a single rowing club that would say, well, we're not, everybody's got an Instagram account, everybody's got a Facebook account, but they're using that internally, right? So it's mostly just for members to share pictures and, complimenting people and sometimes complaining. Nobody's really using it to advertise their learn to row session or come down to the club and do learn to row. And that's something that I've definitely been, that's been a lot of my business the last 6 months, is working with clubs and broadening their online appeal by actually advertising on these sites like Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, right? And here's the thing that blows my mind. It's so inexpensive, right? You can drop $15, $20, $30 on an Instagram ad and reach thousands of people in your community. It's targeted, and you can pick the age that you want to target. You can pick gender. You can, people that are interested in outside activities. And every time I've engaged a club in this, they've seen so much response that they're just, oh my God, I never would have thought this actually works. But yeah, there's so many people on these social media sites now that, they're not watching television. They're not seeing the ads on television anymore. And who can afford that, right? And why would you want to? Because, you could put an ad on TV and have it be seen by millions of people, but only 500 of them care, right? You advertise on social media, you can target thousands of people, and that of those thousands of people, 90% are actually really, really interested in what you're advertising about. And so I think yeah, that's using social media to monetize what the club's doing. And that's a step further for, beyond just raising the dues for a club. How about developing the club's brand? Finding ways. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there. I was just agreeing with you. in terms of, I know some of the stuff that you've talked about as been encourage clubs to actually say that this is the salary we pay for coaches. I know in your article about rowing as $0 billion industry, if we talk about the volunteers, there's so many volunteers in the sport. Do you think that ought to be monetized by the clubs? They ought to be paying a salary for people to volunteer, so the actual cost of the sport is real and covered?
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that, John?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, okay, so it's a little bit selfish. I'm a full-time professional coach, and I'd love to make more money doing what I'm doing. But I also think that if volunteer coaches, and some of them have been doing it for a very, very long time, and some of them are outstanding coaches, no doubt, right? The fact that they're not paid, I don't want to take that away from what they're doing. But I think the more opportunity you have for an individual to be compensated for their time, they're going to want to invest more into that. So the skill of those coaches, as we pay them more, is naturally going to go up. You're going to have more coaches thinking about, what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, planning it. If they have a compensatory opportunity to improve their skill set, they're absolutely going to want to do that. I mean, that's, to me, is a no-brainer. I wanted to become a better coach, not because I just wanted to win races, but because I wanted it to be my career, right? And so, if I need a living wage if it's gonna be my career, right? I need to be able to support myself and potentially even support my family. So I think that, the more we invest in paying the professionals, not just the coaches, but administrators, things like that, the more quality of experience we're going to see within the sport. Absolutely.
Yeah. A few points that people have raised. Luff Ryan talks about masters rowing as maybe a cash-rich community. I know you mentioned about Marine Boat Club there with, I know, a very strong masters rowing community.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think masters are definitely the untapped market potential within clubs. There's been a lot of, in the United States, there's been a lot of focus on the junior market. And, again, I feel like sometimes this conversation's a little too cynical, but yeah, there's definitely a feeling like we need to soak the juniors, right? And I think that there's so much more opportunity for growth. I mean, there's opportunity for growth for junior rowing, but I would agree with this question that I think masters rowers, there's a lot of opportunity for financial growth there. And let's be fair too, right? Like, let's offer a better experience. Like, their point is they get ignored or neglected. I don't see why a masters rower should not be ushered into an outstanding on the water experience, because they're older. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand that, right? I think, I would even go a step further and say, why aren't we structuring masters teams the same way we're structuring youth teams, right? This is going to be controversial. I don't think you need to be there every day in order to put together a quality crew that can be competitive, right? I think the fitness and the training comes first, and that can happen at home now with the rowing machines and home fitness centers. And now, like, everybody's doing that anyway.
Yeah.
Right? And I think you can put together a quality crew that rows, 3, 2, maybe, once a week, right? Like, I think that's okay. So yeah, absolutely. Masters rowing we should have more investment into that.
Adrian Casti has asked, in terms of some of the changes you've spoken about, John, thinking sort of alternative thinking is on its head. Who's going to frustrate that process, and what have they got to lose?
Oh, the people that don't want to pay more, right? Look, nobody wants to pay more, right? You ask me, do I want my I belong to a gym. I belong to a fitness center. Like, do I want my rates to go up? No, of course not. But I think, and I don't think it needs to be a missionary cell to make that happen. I think that, you just need to do the math, put the numbers out, and not just for this year's budget, but for the budget 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? And make the case for, like, at least we need inflationary raises on dues every year. And we're not going to be able to pay for a new roof if we don't have, some savings, 10, in place 10 years down the road. So I think there's going to be some legacy players that really, really push against that. But, we got to move forward.
I know another thing that you've written and spoken about, which is kind of all linked in with this, is that clubs could do far more to actively recruit rowers who come out of college than they do.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to eye roll, but yes, yeah, and I think that's particularly in the United States, that's a problem. We have athletes coming out of the high school level, coming out of the collegiate level, and they just walk away. And why is that?
Yeah,
and it's still a question I'm trying to answer. I think the easy cynical answer is that they're burned out. But I don't think there's a tradition for that. I think, here's a thought, it's a little bit more proactive. Why aren't clubs actively recruiting, right? So you live in a community with a rowing club, presumably you have some commercial industry there, or jobs to be had. Why not enable those athletes to come to your club, participate, maybe open a pipeline or network into job opportunities in the area. Why not? Or maybe incidentally they move to the area and then they're looking for a place to row. Like, again, that's where the social media comes in. Everybody between the ages of 13 and 30 has an Instagram account at this point. Using social media platforms to advertise specifically to that constituency would help that along.
Yeah. Do you think rowing sometimes doesn't do itself a favor? Because, I'm thinking of, my own daughter's, she rowed at university. She's just gone back to a club now. And it's kind of like, if you go back, you have to do the whole program. So the whole program lasts, is I don't know, 6, 7, 8 training sessions a week. She's got a job, people have jobs. Do you think that kind of, it puts people off getting involved in rowing?
Yeah. I think we have to. I think a lot of clubs will. They introduce a certain amount of rigidness into their structure, which again can be a turnoff for people. Like, okay, you can't be a part of this team unless you're here 5 days a week, right? Well, okay, that's, everybody would admit that can be pretty challenging for a professional, right? So I think it's like the standing shove and the single, right? Like, why that may look cool and that may raise the standard for your club, which may have a certain appeal for you, but it definitely becomes exclusive and it keeps people out. So I think, and it feeds into the master's question as well. Why introduce these restrictions on membership when, there's some debate about whether or not that precludes being competitive. Like, if we were to talk about the competitive question, in the United States, we have virtual rowing clubs, which they don't exist in a facility. That's just, sometimes they call them Rolodex clubs, right? It's just a group of athletes that they train on their own, and then they get together and they compete, and they do very well, right? And so based on that, you can't argue to me that, okay, everybody needs to be there 6, 7 days a week in order to be competitive. I think the training and the fitness comes first, and then, getting people to row well together can come after that.
Something around government's involvement. Is there any way, do you see a role for any state or federal government in the States for this? I know in terms of rowing in the UK, there's a lot of money coming into the international side of the sport. And my own club, Molesey Boat Club, has, funds from the international program to run, junior and senior coaches there. So there is money coming in from the centre to clubs. Do you think there's a role for federal or state governments in the US?
That's a great question. I think, maybe that falls into more of a healthcare umbrella, right? Like I personally I go to the gym every day. I would love to get a discount on my health insurance if I could demonstrate to them that I'm a healthy individual and I'm going to be low maintenance, right? So I whether the state or federal government should play a role in that. I don't know. I think maybe that's sort of a larger political question that I'm not in a position to answer. But I, as an active person, I would love to be rewarded for taking care of myself, being fit, being healthy, and incentivized to do that.
Yeah. John, where does this go now? I mean, I'm not going to call it a campaign, although it might look a bit like a campaign if you look back at your LinkedIn profile. Where does this campaign or where does this process go for you now?
Campaign maybe too strong a word. I think I'm advocacy. I think I'm going to continue to advocate for this. For this direction for community. I had a conversation with somebody that actually works for a for-profit rowing club, and he says he's been apostolizing. Is that the right word? He has been campaigning for this type because he's working at a club where it's working. In fact, I would go so far to say that if you were to find, it's not many of them, but if you were to find the for-profit clubs that are out there, you would actually find that they're doing very, very well. I'm going to continue to advocate for this. I mean, to the debatable interest of your viewers, I'm going to, for obvious reasons, I'm going to focus on domestic United States. But it's something that we need to continue to talk about, and I'll put it out there. Maybe there's a entrepreneurial opportunity for someone that wants to be not just the advocate, but the actual broker of helping clubs transition from nonprofit to private. I don't know if that's necessarily in the cards for me, but someone with the right connections, the right understanding the laws around that transition, maybe an attorney, or in having knowledge of the financial backers that would be willing to invest in something like that.
I don't know how up you are in terms of the international side of the sport or the changes in the Olympic program, but one of the questions here is around the introduction of coastal rowing to the Olympics. I don't know if that's going to make any sizable difference to any of your ideas, or it's a way.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Compare it to the surfing, right? So one of the reasons surfing is such a popular sport, and in Southern California here, we have thousands of these guys that have a van full of surfboards, and they rent out. They just show up at the beach, and they rent out surfboards, and they give lessons on the spot. And so I think, coastal rowing could be an outstanding opportunity for someone with a pickup truck and a trailer full of learn to row or coastal boats, just to put people in the surf and teach them how to row and make that accessible. I think that's absolutely a viable business model on a smaller scale, but for one or two people, a family business, I think that's a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And one thing which I thought of asking you really is around international rowing, because the American program, I think, historically is so well funded in some of the big schools in the US, but international rowing is completely not funded in that way, and I think struggles. Is something you're across or you've got a view on?
I'm peripherally aware of it. I don't, I'll be completely candid and say that I'm not, I don't rate that high. I don't really work in those circles that much. But yeah, I think I read a really this is a number of years ago, but, one of these athletes that was blogging made the point that she felt more supported at a collegiate program, the Division I collegiate program she rode at, than as a multi Olympics athlete, right? That's been training for a couple of cycles at this point. So I will always say that we need to support our elite level athletes to as much as we can. I'll always advocate for that. I think the wonderful thing about elite athletes is they show what our potential capacity is as human beings are. Like, that's the most amazing thing about those athletes, is they really, it's entertaining, obviously, to watch the competition and the racing, but they're demonstrating what we are capable of as a species and pushing those boundaries. And that's a huge value, right? It's just, as much as we have our our highest rated intellectuals pushing the boundaries of human development, human intellectual development, and we have these Olympic athletes pushing the boundaries of how fast a muscle can fire, how efficient a capillary can work. I mean, that's incredibly valuable.
And I guess one thing that's come through, which I and many people listening would share with you, is an absolute love of this very unique sport of rowing and right. What it can give, what it has given us, and what it can give to people, which is kind of why I guess we're so passionate about it.
Yeah. And and again, I want to sort of hopefully offer some defense that it's, my perspective may come across as a little bit cynical, but I think, ultimately it's for the growth of the sport and broadening its appeal and getting, what we do is just, it's amazing. It's amazing, right? Like the rowing motion is so perfect, right? Like, we've been executing this motion since the moments we stood up on our hind legs. It's the most basic human motion, right? Even before we were running, we were standing up on our hind legs, and that is the rowing motion, right? And to be able to do that on the water is it's just an amazing feeling. And the more people that can experience that, the better.
Yeah. John, that might be a good place to draw things to a close. I just wonder if, we've ranged far and wide, if there's anything perhaps that we haven't covered or talked about that would be good.
No, I'm full of gratitude for the conversation. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, and great questions from everybody. And I always love a good conversation about rowing, right?
Yeah. And where can people get in touch with you and connect with you if they want to, John?
So I'm primarily on LinkedIn. I also have an Instagram feed, which I post something on there every day. But the best place for me to work is LinkedIn. And I, just a little plug, I will say, if you are a professional or hoping to work in the sport of rowing, I would make sure that you are on LinkedIn, because that is absolutely the place to make things happen.
Yeah, I did read a very good article that you wrote on LinkedIn. You can go back on LinkedIn and look at John's articles, and that's another good article, which is not just for rowing coaches, I think for everybody to
absolutely. Thank you so much, Martin. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Well, we'll end the live part of this broadcast now and say thank you very much, John Wojtkiewicz. You've been an absolute star chatting and made the last hour of our lives all more rich. Thank you very much.
Thank you.